the 2024 NFL regular season is officially over, and because of that, I wanted to come on here and talk about some of the most surprising and some of the most disappointing teams from this year. In fact, I already made some videos on these teams earlier in the season, but regardless, I wanted to talk about them. Now, two things to keep in mind before we do get started. One, when I did make this list, I obviously considered what their preseason expectations were, how well they performed relative to those expectations, but I also did consider things like injuries and if that affected their season. And the second thing I will say, the order that I mentioned these teams in is not in any particular order. I'm not listing them from most surprising to least surprising, or like most disappointing to least disappointing, so yeah, but besides that, of course, go ahead and hit that like button if you guys end up enjoying the video, since it really does help out the channel. And of course, subscribe if you guys are new and you guys enjoy content like this. That way you don't miss out on any new videos like the one you're watching right now. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get this thing started. Alright, I'm going to start this video off by going over my first surprise, and that is going to be the Minnesota Vikings. Now I actually made a video about them back in like November, so you guys can go ahead and check it out if you would like. A card should be popping up right about now, but I, along with a lot of other people, expected the Vikings to be a bad to like mediocre team, as JJ McCarthy, he suffered a season-ending injury before the year started, and although they had a pretty good team and roster and they had a very good coaching staff, you know, me along with many other people had questions about their quarterback situation, as again, a lot of people, including myself, didn't really believe in Sam Darnold. But the Vikings were not bad or mediocre. They actually ended up being one of the best teams in the league, as they finished the year 14-3, and their defense, it was one of the best in the league. And the same can be said about their offense, despite the fact that Christian Darrisaw, who's one of the best, tackles in the NFL, despite the fact that he suffered a season-ending injury in the middle of the year. I mean, their offense was really good with Sam Darnold at the helm, and Sam Darnold, he had a massive career revival, and he was legitimately very good for the Minnesota Vikings, and you got to give a lot of credit to him. He played extremely well, and if you told people before the season started that Sam Darnold would play this well, and that Minnesota would go on to win 14 games, most people, including some Minnesota Vikings fans, would think that you were high, but I mean, it happened. Now, they didn't win the NFC North because, well, the Lions exist, and we will see how they fare in the playoffs, but it's still been a very good season for the Vikings so far. And one thing that I have changed my mind on about them since November is that I really do think that they are a contender, and I think they have the potential to win it all. I mean, it's not going to be an easy thing to do, but I definitely think it's possible, and I think it's going to be pretty interesting to see how they handle this quarterback situation that they now have with, if they should keep Sam Darnold or if they should, keep JJ McCarthy, and how they're going to handle that. It should be a pretty interesting thing to see play out. Now, moving on to my first disappointment of the video, I got the New York Jets. There really isn't much to say here. I actually made a video on the Jets earlier this season. So yeah, you guys can go ahead and check that out. Again, a card should be popping up right about now. But the Jets with a healthy Aaron Rodgers were expected to be at least a playoff team and maybe even a Super Bowl contender if everything went well. But the exact opposite, has unfolded this season, as New York ended up being one of the worst teams in the league. I mean, Aaron Rodgers, he looked totally washed up. They fired Robert Saleh like around week 5 or 6, and as a result, their defense fell off and their coaching was terrible for most of the year. Their offensive line was still not that good this year, and the vibes around this team were simply put just terrible, and they were a total shit show. And I even said in that Jets video that I did believe that, I believe before the season there was a world where the Jets would miss the playoffs, but I thought they'd win at least like 7 games, but they've been worse than last year. They've been worse than last year when they had Zach Wilson at quarterback. And Aaron Rodgers and Woody Johnson, they deserve a lot of blame for creating such a toxic culture, in this organization. As Aaron Rodgers, he's refused to take accountability a lot of times, and Woody Johnson, he's constantly meddled, in the team's affairs, despite the fact that he has terrible football knowledge. I mean, there was that story where he vetoed that Jerry Jeudy trade because he thought his Madden rating wasn't high enough, which was, it was really crazy to say, and it's just a big testament to how much of a moron Woody Johnson is. The Jets, look, they need a new head coach, and who knows what happens with Aaron Rodgers and their quarterback situation. I mean, does he end up retiring? Does he stay? Does he leave? Do the Jets end up signing a quarterback? Do they draft one? I mean, they got a really talented team, but they need good coaching and they need good quarterback play if they want to put it all together and be an actually good team and finally make the playoffs. Moving on to my second surprise, I got the Washington Commanders. I also made a video on the Commanders earlier in the season, but Washington was expected to be one of, if not the worst team in the NFL in 2024, despite the fact that they had another new regime and they had another new young quarterback in Jaden Daniels. But the Commanders were actually super good this year, and they finished the year 12-5. Jaden Daniels, he had a tremendous rookie season, and at the bare minimum, he will be a top 2 offensive rookie of the year candidate. Their offense has been very good as their offensive line has actually played surprisingly well. Their running back duo of Brian Robinson and Austin Eckler is pretty good when they're both healthy. They have struggled with injuries this year, but again, they've both played pretty well when they're on the field. Terry McLaurin is one of the best receivers in the NFL. There's no debate about that. And Cliff Kingsbury has actually been a really good offensive coordinator, and he's even gotten some head coaching buzz again because of how good of an offensive coordinator he's been for the Commanders. Along with that, you do have to give a lot of credit to Dan Quinn, as he's actually been a pretty good head coach this year, and I wasn't really high on him heading into the year, but I gotta give credit where it's due, and Dan Quinn so far really has proved me wrong. Now, Washington's defense, it's not very good, and who knows how far they make it into the playoffs. But either way, it's still been a very amazing and just a really refreshing season for Washington fans, and they got a really bright future ahead of them for what feels like, the first time in an eternity. I mean, if they can get a good wide receiver too and improve that defense, and Jaden Daniels continues to improve as a player, they should become a title contender in no time. Now, the next disappointment I do have is the Cincinnati Bengals. Now, funny enough, the Bengals actually had a down season last year, but to be fair to them, Joe Burrow was having a down year largely due to injuries he was dealing with at the time, and just when he started to turn things around, he suffered a season-ending injury, and their defense also wasn't very good last year. But a lot of people expected Cincy to bounce back in 2024, but that didn't really happen because even though Joe Burrow had a big rebound and their offense was amazing, and in fact, Joe Burrow, again, he was one of the best quarterbacks in the league, and Jamar Chase, he won the Triple Crown as he led the NFL in catches, receiving yards, and receiving touchdowns. Their defense was absolutely fucking awful, and as a result, they went 9-8 and they barely missed out on the playoffs. And what's crazy is that they lost 7 games by 1 possession, and they put up at least 20 points in 6 of those losses. And at one point, they were 4-8, and they did go on a 5-game winning streak, but by then, it was too little, too late. And it really does suck if you are a Bengals fan, because if they had an average defense and if they beat the Patriots out of all teams week 1 and had won 3 or 4 of those 7 games, with the Patriots game being one of them, they would have been in the playoffs, but nope. Now, if Cincinnati can figure out their defense, they should be back in the playoffs. But either way, if you are a Bengals fan, 2024 was really frustrating as your offense was again absolutely amazing. Joe Burrow was tremendous, and Jamar Chase was again tremendous as well. But all of that went to waste largely due to the fact that their defense was it was just absolutely terrible. Next up, for the surprises, I got the Denver Broncos. Now, the Denver Broncos were expected to be one of the worst teams. Some people even thought they would be the worst team in the league this year, as people thought that they were very lacking in talent, and some people just weren't that high on Bo Nix. And along with that, some people thought Sean Payton was a really overrated and not as good of a head coach as people believed. But I was high on Bo Nix, I will say that, and I thought they'd be a little bit better than most people thought, but I was thinking they'd win 6 to 8 games. But instead, the Denver Broncos, they won 10 games, and they made the playoffs and to snap their 8-year-long playoff drought. Their defense, it was elite, and it was one of the best units in the league, and it was more than just Patrick Surtain, as their defensive line, it's really good. And their secondary outside of Patrick Surtain is also pretty good as well, and the Denver Broncos offense, it was alright. It wasn't anything amazing, but it also wasn't total trash either. Bo Nix, he had a pretty good rookie season, and Sean Payton proved that he's still one of the best head coaches in the league. And hey, even if Denver is a first round exit, chances are they will be. It's still been a really successful season, for the Denver Broncos, as they completely exceeded most people's expectations, and they snapped their playoff drought, and it really does look like Bo Nix is the answer at quarterback. And they were looking for a franchise quarterback for such a long time, after Peyton Manning retired. But either way, the Denver Broncos, they surprised a lot of people and had a great season. Now, the third team I have under disappointments is the Jacksonville Jaguars, and like the Jets, I did make a video about them earlier this season, and the Jaguars actually had a pretty disappointing 2023 season, but a lot of people, like myself, expected this team to bounce back and be a playoff contender or even a playoff team in 2024, but the Jaguars ended up being one of the worst teams in the NFL instead, as their defense was absolutely atrocious, their coaching was also atrocious, their offensive line was pretty mediocre, and offensively, they were really inconsistent. Now, Trevor Lawrence, he was, he wasn't terrible, but he did struggle with consistency, and along with that, he still didn't take that leap from, being decent to a great or even elite quarterback. And while he definitely did, miss some games and dealt with a lot of injuries this year, the Jaguars were awful even before his injuries. Now, Jacksonville, they do have, quite a bit of talent, and I definitely think they have the potential to be a pretty good team and even be a playoff team. And, that was, one of the reasons why so many people believed in the Jacksonville Jaguars. But, their coaching, it really has to improve. They have to nail this next coaching staff, that they hire if they want to be good. And they also do need Trevor Lawrence to be more consistent and take that leap into being a great quarterback, like they expected, when they first drafted him. So, look, the Jaguars, there is some reason to have hope for them, as again, they are talented. They really just need to find, a good coaching staff. Now, the last team I got under surprises, I got the Los Angeles Chargers. The Chargers hired Jim Harbaugh as their head coach this offseason, and they drafted guys like Joe Alt and Ladd McConkey, but despite their additions, many people didn't think LA would be very good since their roster was just really lacking in talent. And while, like the Broncos, I was a little bit higher on them than most people, but a lot of people didn't expect too much, from the Chargers. And me personally, I thought they'd win 8 to 10 games. But the Chargers ended up winning 11 games, and they're currently in the playoffs as the 5 seed. Justin Herbert, he was tremendous once again, no surprise there. And, to make things even more impressive, the interior of his offensive line was not very good, and his weapons outside of Ladd McConkey weren't that great either. However, Jim Harbaugh, he has been a great head coach for the Chargers, and he's proved to be the answer at head coach. And along with that, the Chargers coaching staff overall, I think, has just been very good, especially Jesse Minter as the defensive coordinator, as LA, despite the fact that their roster on paper isn't the greatest, the Chargers defense, it's been one of the best units in the league, and along with that, they found some real steals, in the draft, in a guy like Tarheeb Still and Cam Hart. And even as somebody who was a little bit higher on LA compared to most, I thought the chances of them winning more than 10 games wasn't super high, but that's exactly what they did. And like I said before, the Chargers, they finally found the answer at head coach with Jim Harbaugh. And while I don't think they are a title contender just yet, if they can improve the weapons around Justin Herbert and the interior O-line and, maintain this great defense and coaching and a good coaching staff, then they definitely should become a contender. And to wrap up the video, I got one last disappointment, and that is going to be the Chicago Bears. Now, the Bears, after going on a hot streak to end the second half of 2023 and adding guys like Caleb Williams and Roma Dunze in the draft, along with acquiring Keenan Allen in the trade market, they were expected to be a playoff contender or even a playoff team, and people thought they would also have a solid defense and that their offense would be really good. In fact, some people thought that Caleb Williams was walking into the best situation a number 1 pick has ever had. But this season, it ended up being a total disaster for the Bears, as they went 5-12, and after starting the year 4-2, they went 1-10 in the remaining 11 games. Now, it's nice that they beat the Packers week 18, on that 51-yard field goal, but going 1-10 in your last 11 games after starting out the year 4-2, it's absolutely pathetic to say the least. And I mean, we all know about the infamous Hail Mary versus Washington, and truthfully, I think that might have broken them, because after that, they were never the same. But in all seriousness, the Bears' offense was extremely disappointing, as their offensive line wasn't that good. Their run game wasn't that good. Their weapons were quite underwhelming, as DJ Moore had a down year, largely due to lackadaisical effort from him. Keenan Allen is still good, but he isn't what he once was. Roma Dunze, I thought, was pretty decent. And Cole Kmet, he was fine, but he was worse compared to last year. Along with that, their coaching was absolutely awful, and they even fired Matt Eberflus, their ex-head coach, and Shane Waldron, their ex-offensive coordinator, in the middle of the year. And I mean, for a good reason. Both of those guys were absolutely terrible. And along with that, Caleb Williams just was not that good, and he was really, really disappointing. Now, I do get that the team around Caleb Williams wasn't really the best, and it was, pretty underwhelming, but he does deserve some blame too, because a lot of times I think he was just overthinking things. Along with that, he was pretty inaccurate. He had shitty pocket presence, and a lot of times, he was holding on to the ball too long, which led to him being, sacked a lot, because, again, the Bears' offensive line isn't really the best. But a large reason why Caleb got sacked so much is because his pocket presence was so bad, and again, because he held onto the ball for so long. Meanwhile, the Bears' defense, while it wasn't exactly terrible, it wasn't tremendous, and it definitely wasn't good enough for them to carry them to a decent record. And, like I said for the Jaguars, I will say, even though this season was really bad for Chicago, I think that they do have talent. They mostly just need good coaching, to fix this team up. And if they can get a good head coach, improve their offensive line a little bit, and Caleb Williams can improve as a player, then this team should be much better than they were in 2024. But that's all I gotta say for today's video. Thank you guys so much for watching. It really does mean a lot to me. Again, like, subscribe, do all of that. And then check me out on social media. The links to my Twitter and Instagram are in the description below. But without further ado, I'm out, you guys.